Hello and welcome to this live stream of today's public meeting brought to you by Downtown Gun Rapids, Inc. We will begin shortly. Please keep your sound on and we'll see you soon. Hello and welcome to this live stream of today's public meeting brought to you by Downtown Gun Rapids, Inc. We will begin shortly. Please keep your sound on and we'll see you soon. Hello and welcome to this live stream of today's public meeting brought to you by Downtown Gun Rapids, Inc. We will begin shortly. Please keep your sound on and we'll see you soon. Hello and welcome to this live stream of today's public meeting brought to you by Downtown Gun Rapids, Inc. We will begin shortly. Please keep your sound on and we'll see you soon.
Meeting minutes from July 13th, 2022. Any comments or corrections or questions? All right, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Thank you. Any other comments? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next, the preliminary June 30th year-end financials. Ms. Chapman, welcome.
Hi, good morning. These statements are preliminary. There's a few items that are not, going against this budget. We've got another payroll allocation that was done, depreciation expense, things like that, year-end accruals and adjustments. Not everything has been done yet. But I don't anticipate too great of a change. At this point, when the statements were created, you were 86% of the way through your budget in the non-tax funds and 56% in your local tax funds. So I anticipate those would just increase slightly. If anybody has any questions or comments, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, you guys are in good shape. And I would ask for approval for Statement D if there's no questions.
Any questions? Yeah, I didn't either. All right, I would entertain a motion. Thank you. Support?
Support.
All right, any other comments or questions? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Downtown tree plantings, yay. Well, nobody likes to see those empty wells, right?
Good morning, everybody. I hope we're all doing well today. I'm just going to jump right in here. So in 2015, as we are all well aware, GR Ford set out the goal for downtown to really raise its tree canopy from 5% up to 10%. And we, since that time, between ourselves, our partners, and other developers, have planted over 1,000 trees. So kudos to us. If you recall, in December, Friends of Grand Rapids Parks provided an overview of the existing tree population in downtown, as well as an overview of the potential planting sites, as well as the vacant sites where we could plant some trees in the ground. They identified 462 vacant sites where trees could easily go in the ground, and since that time, we've probably planted 100 of them back in the spring when Friends planted 100 trees for us. But they also identified 228 sites that trees could be planted. However, they required remediation, such as stump removal or dead tree removal, before that could happen. The scope of that work is really beyond what Friends is capable of, given the limitations that they have and the tools they don't have. And so began working with them and also trying to understand what it would take to plant sort of those 228 sites. And so we sort of set out a proposal, request for proposal, actually, to plant 200 of those locations. And that was a really big task that we asked folks to look at. And so out of that process emerged kind of one bidder, Stout Creek Landscaping. We've used them before for various things like tree plantings, flower plantings, some other landscaping, some work that they've done for us. And really kind of what they told us was trying to do all of that work across two planting seasons, fall and spring, it was probably too much for them and really anybody else. And so we sort of worked with them to build out a schedule and a proposal that would be easier for them to tackle and maybe a little easier for us to digest budgetarily. So where we've landed is trying to plant these 200 trees across 4 planting seasons. So beginning this fall, and then every fall and spring between now and for the next 2 years, give or take. And basically what we're looking at is a total budget of $65,528, which includes a 12% contingency for this planting season, which would be fall, to remediate 55 sites and plant 55 trees in those sites. And then that's pretty much it, so I'll take questions.
So between the 462 sites and then the 228 more sites, we're really trying over the next, basically 2 years, because they'll do a fall and a spring planting to try to fill all those.
Yeah,
Am
so
I understanding that right?
We have Friends, they do a planting for us every fall and spring. The last approval was for 100 trees per season. So we have another 100 trees coming from Friends this fall. We'll do an additional 55 if this is approved from Stout Creek.
For this fall?
For this fall, yep. And then we'll work with Friends to get our contract proposal ready for probably the winter again, and then they'll have a spring planting, and then we'll also bring forth the Stout Creek phase kind of B for planting in the fall. So yeah, in those 2 years, we'll probably, if we don't bite it all off, we'll be really, really close.
Okay, so then the intent will be to, over the next 2 years, basically get all of the tree wells filled, and then we'll move to a maintenance and replacement?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, that's the plan.
But actually, so My understanding it's over 600 trees?
It's 462 sites, but we've probably already planted 100 of them. So that 462 is from December of last year, and then we
Plus
planted
the 200.
plus the 228. Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's about 600 trees. Yeah.
I feel like we keep
And
going
I should
backwards.
mention too that planting these 55 trees will bring us to about 9% of canopy. So we're pretty close to the goal that we're trying to hit. And that doesn't include the 100 trees that Friends is also going to plant this fall as well. So we're making good progress on that. I think there was a question.
Cam?
I think Kevin, you had a question.
Herb?
Who is responsible for ongoing maintenance of the trees?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we're working with Stout Creek to develop a maintenance plan. We are pretty confident that they won't require a ton of maintenance beyond watering and just some basic pruning. So we'll be taking on some of that in-house with the ambassador program. And then my hope is to work with Friends to be able to use their pruning program to prune the trees as they are needed. They do that already for trees that they don't that aren't part of our contract in downtown. They have an outside existing contract with the city to prune other trees. So I'm hoping that we can sort of latch onto that and take advantage of that.
So just curious, what's our total number of trees?
The total number of trees, I don't have that number.
Roughly.
At the last report from Friends was a little over 5,000 trees.
Okay.
And so their report doesn't necessarily include all of the third-party trees that get planted. I think we track that a little bit better than they do. And it doesn't include, we've planted a couple of trees this year, and then they also did a planting in spring. So it doesn't include these kind of off plantings that we've done. So.
Sorry, Jim?
Melvin, could you talk a little bit about the material that is in a lot of the tree wells to cover it, that replaced the grates many years ago?
Sure, the porous pavement.
Yeah, and what the plan is for that? How will that be included in this?
No, so Stout Creek doesn't do that work. That would be a different contractor and a different scope of work. So the plan is to replace the porous pavement material or replace the tree grates. If there's a tree grate there, to replace it with the porous pavement material. We did some plantings in the fall in some tree wells that needed to be mitigated, and then I think we've had a couple of other spots come up in the last year or so. So the plan is once these trees are planted, I'll begin work on getting those tree wells filled with the porous pavement. So I'll probably always be playing a little bit of catch up. So once they plant the trees in these locations where the porous pavement needs to go, I'll follow up and get the porous pave applied to the tree wells where it makes sense. So I'll probably be up here to ask for money for that.
Greg?
Sort of a three-part question. Trees are very popular.
You always have a three-part question.
Do we have pathway to 10% for that extra percent? Is 10% sort of the maximum our current hardscape would allow? And then third, how should we think about 10% coverage as a benchmark? I mean, is that a best practice for cities our size or population density? Is there any sort of metric to context it?
To be fair, you didn't tell me they were going to all be this hard. So let's see. Do we have a pathway to 10%? Absolutely. Between the planting sites that we have available and the remediation sites, we easily can get to 10%. That doesn't. None of our projections include any development that is planning to happen either. So we've been fortunate that trees are going in that we weren't anticipating. So we gain canopy in that capacity as well. I sort of forgot your second question.
How much room is there beyond that 10%?
That's a great question. I'm not really sure. We'd have to look at how much room we have beyond the 10% to really go beyond that. I do know that in my talks with Friends, there's still a lot of capacity on private sites that we haven't really explored yet that would require a lot more work for us to build partnerships and agreements to put trees on property and maintain them. So I think that's probably where the capacity beyond 10% lies, is really exploring those partnerships. And then the other place that we will find it is finding places where there's concrete, where we can get rid of the concrete and put a tree instead. So those require obviously a lot more work to do both of those things. But that's where beyond the maintenance and replacement of dead trees and tree wells and other sites, that's probably the next frontier for us, is figuring out those partnerships and figuring out where we don't necessarily need as much concrete as we have and how to get trees in there. And the third question was, is 10% like a benchmark?
Yeah.
I think so. Like the canopy coverage, I think it varies depending on the city and the city size, but 10% for us especially is good in that it provides what we see as enough canopy to kind of mitigate the urban heat island effect. So for us, that's a good goal, and I think we'll do everything we can to strive beyond the 10%. I love trees, and hopefully you all do too, and I think the green space that they provide for downtown is really important. So I think 10% is a good benchmark, but I'd like to push beyond that as much as we can.
Two other points to add on that. One is when we did GR Forward and established that goal, we were at 5%, so 10% was essentially doubling where we were. I think we also see the river corridor as a huge opportunity as we're transitioning sites like 201 and some of the other underutilized spaces. There's a ton of capacity that could be added.
That's awesome.
Any other questions? So Tim, are we going to rebid this next year then?
So Stout Creek gave us a proposal to cover all of the 200 trees that we asked to plant. The way that we sort of approached it, because they felt that they couldn't lock in the pricing for future plantings, was to kind of bite it off in chunks. And so kind of looking at the total proposal that they give us, what we'll look at it is probably, I'm not sure that rebidding through an RFP process makes sense every time, because it was really hard to get bidders for this. The work it's not sexy, and nobody really wants to go out and pull a bunch of stumps. So it probably works better to just maintain the relationship we have with Stout Creek and just work to understand the pricing and outline of the scope of work for each of the planting seasons that they can do, and then come back to this body for each of those planting seasons and sort of get approval to kind of move forward with each zones. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, sorry.
Question. And I'm assuming that they are working from our tree list that we have approved.
Yes. So when the bid went out, I worked with Friends of Grand Rapids Parks to put together, obviously, a comprehensive site list of all the places we want planted and the work that needed to be done in those locations. But it also included a list of trees that really Friends felt was what they're planting, and so would be complementary to the work that they're already doing. Okay. So they'll be planting similar trees to what Friends of Grand Rapids Park plants.
And for this amount, I would assume they're pretty significant size ball and burlap.
Yeah, so I think the diameter is 1.75.
Okay.
And most of the cost, I should note, is in the remediation. It's in the hours and the manpower to remove the stumps and the machinery and all that stuff. So we're paying a little bit more, but we're also doing a lot of work on the front end to get those trees in the ground.
Yeah, I actually think it's a good price for doing that work.
I agree.
The stump removal and remediation is pretty significant.
Yeah.
Anything else? I think it's a matter of opinion, who might think trees are sexy or not.
Hey, yeah. I totally agree. I totally agree.
Other than that, I would entertain a motion to approve.
Yeah, support.
All right. Any other comments? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion carries.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Mullen. Make sure I don't skip. We're on 5, right?
Yeah, 5.
Disability Advocates of Kent County funding authorization. Mr. Miller, welcome.
Morning. So we, as you know, have been partnering with Disability Advocates since 2019. And this has produced like a variety of different kinds of initiatives and scopes that we've worked with them on. And those really are rooted in GR Forward and seeking to create a more welcoming and inclusive downtown. So that's all sort of guided in that our document. And one of the key things in that document is talking about providing stress-free experience for all ages and abilities. So these initiatives seek to look at both policies and design within our city, and in particular downtown, that really begin to shape our built environment and how people navigate that environment. So it looks at big questions like, how does a wheelchair user navigate events? Or how does someone using a white cane safely and predictably cross our streets? And there's a lot of places where that stuff doesn't happen. And I think that this work to date has impacted our projects specifically, and it's taught us, or we've learned a great deal about how to make the downtown for all. And I think we've also realized that there's more work to do, and really looking at the detail of what we're doing, how we're doing it, how we're approaching it, and incorporating disability advocates into those conversations at a very early stage so that we can continue to have these discussions and figure these things out in the stuff that we're building. So Kim and Patrick are here from Disability Advocates, and they're going to discuss this work a little bit more in detail, you know, what we've done, what we plan to do. And then after that, after they're done, there is an action item in this agenda item, and we're recommending an amount of $100,000 to continue this work in fiscal year 23. This amount was included in the fiscal year 23 budget in Goal 3, and I think that was under accessibility and mobility. So it was anticipated as we continue to this work with them. So I'm going to turn this over to Patrick Parks and Kim Davey, and they're going to walk you through what we've been up to. Kim?
Thank you, Mark. Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Kim Davey, and I'm the Community Engagement Manager for Disability Advocates, and my colleague Patrick Parks is the Business Development Coordinator for Absolutely Accessible Kent. We are happy to be here this morning to visit with you and talk about what we've been up to. I'd like to begin this morning with a question. Based on our research, what is the top barrier to individuals with disabilities and those without disabilities visiting downtown? What do you think the top barriers?
No right answers, no wrong answers. Just better answers.
Crosswalks.
Good one.
Crosswalks is good. Parking is an excellent idea.
Sidewalks.
Sidewalks. All of these are important, but the number one obstacle that people face is uncertainty. And so it is our objective to reduce uncertainty so that people with disabilities will come downtown. We worked with our colleague Jackson Botsford to take a look at renovations at the Civic Theater, and we invited people with disabilities who you've heard us talk about before. We affectionately refer to them as our test pilots, and they came down to the Civic and looked at all of the work that they had done in their renovations. And Tammy said to me, we never thought we would be able to come downtown and see a performance at the Civic. We just didn't think that was possible for us. She is a scooter user, and it's really rewarding to get to work with people who have disabilities when they have those aha moments. So reducing uncertainty is important. When we visited with you last year at this time, we were involved in pathway assessments. Yeah, we'll do that. Yes, thank you, Patrick. Pathway assessments. And we also, as a result of those pathway assessments, we decided to prepare parking lot and pathway paragraphs, and this is mostly because Dave Bulkowski loves alliteration. This is an example of a pathway paragraph that helps people understand how to get to the government center ramp, what to expect when they arrive there. We will be working with the city and Experience Grand Rapids and Mobile GR to find the right place for those to live. Improved accessibility is another outcome from our pathway assessments. We have secured accessibility consulting contracts with private architecture firms on 3 public renovation projects. These projects have encompassed updates to the wayfinding signage system in downtown Grand Rapids, planned renovations for Lions Square, and planned renovations of the Hill and River network that connects Belknap Hill, Monroe North, downtown Grand Rapids, and the Grand River. We'll also be working at Mark's invitation on the upcoming redesign of Calder Plaza and the Van Andel Arena alleyway. We are also in the process of renewing our consulting agreement with the city of Grand Rapids, and efforts to secure similar contracts with additional municipalities are ongoing. We would like to take this opportunity to thank you for the ramps that have been introduced in the social zones. Makes a big difference. You know, when we went down there last year on the pathway assessments, Patrick wasn't able to enter the social zones. And so I've been out enjoying seeing those ramps be used by folks who want to participate fully in life downtown. We also tested, beta tested the DisArt mobile app, which was developed for ArtPrize. And what that allowed us to do was to upload data and photographs so that people could call up the app on their phone and see what kind of obstacles they might be facing. Last week's launch of GoMove, a new mobile app, shows promise. And much like the app developed by DisArt, users can review locations for accessibility and upload photos. These findings have been shared with Kenzie Channing here at DGRI to in turn further and potentially pursue a partnership with the Downtown Neighbors Network. A new initiative that Patrick is going to talk about is the Kent County Access Collaborative. This is a group that we've pulled together, and any further development of the mobile app will fall under the Access Collaborative to determine if we're going to put any additional resources there. Patrick?
Yeah, I was just going to add too, one of the challenges that we found, although, you know, apps are kind of the new thing and an easy area for folks to say, yes, let's build an app for that, right? As we sort of dove into this, one of our key questions was, how do we get the most out of, without spending too many resources on one effort, how do we get the most impact? And so in thinking about some of that, one of the challenges with apps is this broader adoption, right? We've seen this all over the accessibility ecosystem in other states as well. It's how do, you know, people will create these wonderful apps and yet adoption ends up lacking. And so our question was, you know, how do we still get that information out there and still leave ideas of further development on the table? And I think that's where the parking lot paragraphs came from too, because they're this low-tech, high-impact solution. We can still get that information out while we're trying to figure out what is the best long-term solution for people to engage with technology.
Yes. So this is a photo of some recent construction downtown, and it did make me say one step forward and 2 steps back. They added a curb and then they needed to install a step, instead of just allowing that to be flush so that a wheelchair could access it. Jackson placed a call to Mobile GR, and that was immediately remedied. They're going to take care of that and fix it. But lots of challenges that we face, but we love the work, and we love the work, and we're very appreciative of your support.
And lots more to do as well, as I'll talk about.
Lots more to do.
Thank you.
And so Kim mentioned, just a little bit here, Kim mentioned this, what we're calling at this moment the Kent County Access Collaborative. And this was really born out of this idea of, okay, we've done a lot of this great work, we've come across a lot of these wonderful insights, but how do we create a vehicle to make sure that they're embedded and it's not just, a one-off effort? How do we make sure that this informs what's going on in our cities and beyond, and really benefits that work positively going forward? So we brought together mayors, city managers, and community development directors from the 6-city footprint for a series of 3 meetings to talk about, where do we see, first we started with, what are your pain points around accessibility, right? So I think a big part of that initial meeting was folks realizing, wow, we're really facing a lot of the same issues in Kentwood and Wyoming as we are in Grand Rapids and East Grand Rapids and in Kent County more broadly. And once we kind of developed that shared working structure, it really fell into place to have a second and a third meeting to say, okay, well, what are we going to do about it? And so after those 3 meetings, our goal going forward is to sit down with every city individually and say, okay, here is the proposed working structure that we have for this collaborative of folks coming together quarterly and working on shared accessibility initiatives, challenges, what have you, and seeing, also customizing that as well in these meetings with each different city to say, what are those shared issues you see you all contributing to, and then what are maybe some more individualized issues that the group may be able to help you with, even though it might be an issue, say, just for Wyoming, maybe Grand Rapids has some insight that would be helpful to the broader group and helpful to best practice going forward. And so we really think that a collaborative of this nature and meeting quarterly is, as I said, incredibly important because it's a place where, again, these sorts of one-off insights can be amplified and applied across more of a best practices ecosystem. So we found in our series of meetings a lot of great conversation on things like on-street parking, on things like accessible housing, things that would be difficult for one city to tackle by itself, but together as a group, a lot of these great ideas started to emerge. And so we're really looking forward to this next phase. Now that we've sort of built the, why are we here, why are we doing this, everybody rolling up their sleeves and getting to work, meeting with the individual cities, and then coming together as a group again, hopefully in October, to start year 1 of operations. And then I included some of these strategic initiatives might be familiar to you all from our presentation last year. And I included this here because I think this is also important in terms of when we talk about why we think a collaborative like this is important as a vehicle, it really helps us to touch on all of these initiatives that we already set out in the adaptive strategic plan and shared with you all last year. The first one being, the obvious one is formalizing that collaboration, right? So getting folks talking, getting folks working together, sharing best practices across the 6 cities. The second one is the built environment, right? So addressing exclusion by designing for inclusion and not just base level ADA compliance. So again, this is where that best practices piece comes into play. So if we can get the cities together and talking, it's like, oh, We had a lot of great success with this in Kentwood or Wyoming or Grand Rapids or East Grand Rapids or Walker or Granville, right? And sharing that and amplifying that impact. The third piece as well, and it's something that has really, I would say, grown with newer focuses on DEI and DEIA, adding accessibility to that aspect, this idea of workplace accessibility. So how do we help our cities understand attracting talent, expanding talent, the talent pool of people with disabilities, because we know from our work that there are many, many talented people with disabilities, and they simply need that assistance and that support to be able to activate, within the employment ecosystem. And we find very positive productivity and retention benefits from that as well. The fourth one here is one we kind of already touched on. Kim may have mentioned, and Mark mentioned, the social and cultural activities. So not only providing accessibility assessments for events downtown, but also creating that social and cultural playbook, if you will, so to speak, that our surrounding cities can learn from around creating accessible events and inclusive events. And then the last one here is technology. So we know that technology is, ever advancing, and so a collaborative like this will definitely help in terms of if, one city has success with a particularly accessible technology, or the collaborative together investigates and dives into further research, say on, an app that could be adopted across the 6 cities. We see where a structure like this definitely has value from an accessible technology perspective. And then lastly here, we've just included sort of a scope of work breakdown so that you can see kind of the percentages of the core areas or the buckets that we will be working on going forward. So the first one there is the continued development and startup of the Access Collaborative. The second one is the renovation and project consulting. The third one there is review of downtown spaces, places, and events, and technologies deployed as part of those events and other projects. And then the fourth one is, as I talked about, kind of that broader playbook of how do we create, as we're looking to create additional events and add additional events, what are those best practices that we can begin to implement most broadly? And then I believe that's our last slide there. So thank you again for having us, and thank you for your support over the years. It's been a phenomenal partnership and one we've certainly appreciated.
Questions?
Boy, the key seems to be, you said it, but to get it embedded in the community, whether it's developers or construction people or doing it right the first time. So, we have some projects anticipated, so I think we need to keep you involved, so.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things, especially as we worked with Mark on this scope of work, that we're excited about is previously we've been fortunate to work with the individual project teams as a consultant, but it's dependent on kind of them winning the project and then us being invited to be part of that team, right? But the way that we've built this work plan going forward is that we would be a resource to DGRI on all projects, so that no matter who wins a bid for a project, or whether it be a new build or a renovation, we would be part of that team from the beginning to make sure that the best outcome emerges from all of that.
Mayor?
I'll just add, I don't have a question, appreciate you both being here. So I've met and talked about the Kent County Access Collaborative, and I think it's a great idea. I feel like I'm a broken record when I talk about how a lot of the issues we face aren't just city issues, they're countywide issues. And I think our surrounding cities and the county can learn a lot from the work that we've done. And having that information sharing, I think, is going to be really valuable. So I'm glad to see it still moving forward, and then we'll reconnect. I just made a note. I'll make sure that you're invited to one of our Metro 6 meetings coming up. So.
Any other comments? Yes.
But to piggyback on something that the chair said, I think that retained consultancy is going to be incredibly valuable in the design phase of future projects. So the two-part question: is there an ideal accessible city? Is there some archetype that we can look to and say they sort of went the furthest on their journey? And then the second, on the built environment, when you talk about changing systems and funding to drive best practices, could you kind of unpack a little bit what the future state, what that deliverable looks like?
Yeah, so to your first question about kind of model cities, right? And I'll add a disclaimer that no city is perfect, right? So even in these cities that I'm going to mention, there are still issues. But one that sticks out to me, and it's a city that's been, embedded in disability history as well, and that's Berkeley, California. University of California, Berkeley, and Ed Roberts and his advocacy group, the Rolling Quads, was a huge part of disability history. It's an amazing story, that I won't get into here, but that has really galvanized the city of Berkeley around, how do we create a fully accessible city? And so one of the things that they've done, their Center for Independent Living, Disability Advocates is a Center for Independent Living as well, our organization, but their Center for Independent Living in Berkeley is connected to their train station there, or their BART station, right? And so individuals with disabilities can just hop on the BART station and get to the Center for Independent Living. It's embedded in the fabric, and that's just one example of Berkeley being a leader in many of the things that they've done. Another one is Denver, Colorado has been done some particularly good things with accessibility. Seattle is one as well. And then I would say I'm hesitant to give these next two just because they're larger and they still make a lot of mistakes, but New York and Chicago, and the reason why I say those two, they actually have mayor's offices of people with disabilities. So offices embedded within their, working structure around addressing accessibility concerns on a broader scale. So that's the first answer to your two-part question. And then the second answer, the second part of that, in terms of what that looks like, the broader, what does the future state look like? So our executive director, Dave Bolkowski, is actually in conversations right now at the state level to work with the MEDC, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, to say, here's a model we've created in Grand Rapids. How can we get funding for this throughout the state so that other state communities can benefit as well? And part of that work, and this is work that we're still in the process of bringing together, we've engaged 5 architecture firms across the city of Grand Rapids that we've worked with, Progressive AE, Matheson, Spark 43, and some others, around what are those key features of universal design that work well for everyone and really improve a space. And the ultimate goal of that work is to take those features and to work with the MEDC to embed that into their grant-making process so that when cities and parks and whatever effort goes to apply for a grant through the MEDC, they will have an opportunity to learn about and incorporate inclusive design into their designs to earn more points in the grant-making process. And as we know, those points are crucial because there are scarce funds for many projects, right? And so it's our hope that by kind of codifying these things, and again, this is just one effort, but by codifying these things into the MEDC process, we'll start to see some of that embedding not only here in Grand Rapids, but also statewide.
Maybe a question for DGRI staff. The contract isn't clear to me whether it's totally kind of support of the work, or is it project-based? So for example, number 2 talks about consultation on new build and rehabilitation projects, $20,000. Are we paying $20,000 whether there's 2 projects or whether there's 10? How does that work? And similarly, number 4, the social and cultural events. I mean, is this, I could see either too much work for them or the opposite. Can you talk about what that looks like?
Yeah, Mark, jump in on that.
Yeah, I can answer that. It looks like Patrick has something to say as well. So I think that, first of all, the overall number that we're talking about is a not to exceed. So some of this stuff is like, it's sort of, I think when you talk about the second item, when it's consulting, we don't know. So it's the 20,000 is there. It might be 10, it might be 15. It's just going to be project dependent, and that's going to also be the same case with the event stuff, the event and cultural stuff. We just don't know yet. We know that we're integrating them into the Calder project that we're restarting simply because when we did that project initially, we didn't really have them on the core team. So that's the same is true with the Van Andel Plaza or the alleyway project. We didn't really have them on the team because it was really pre-2019 before we were thinking about some of this stuff. So I think a lot of it depends on how we put those teams together, who wins the RFP process, and then going on from there and bringing them in as needed. And it might be things that pop up that we don't quite know. I mean, certainly during the pandemic era, we had social zones put out and realized after the fact that they weren't really accessible. These folks have helped us figure out ways to make them more accessible and even vetted our solutions to make sure that what we were putting in was going to be the right thing during that process. So I think that it's stuff like that that we're going to see where it's like more evolving, ongoing, and see where it goes with some of that stuff. But it is a sort of a not to exceed number.
I think, Mark, you covered it all, but what I was just going to say as well is when I put this slide up on the screen, it was simply a draft scope of work breakdown based on what we thought, how we thought the percentages would break out. But, that's not to say, as Mark mentioned, that as issues arise, that things, could be less, could shift around a little bit in terms of if we decide one area is more of a priority than another, or if certain priority pops up and Mark says, hey, can you guys take a look at this or spend more time here? Our vision is to be nimble in this, right? So again, this is just kind of the draft of what we thought with what we knew at the moment, sitting in the vacuum of our conference room. But as things do come up, our goal is to be nimble and be here to provide whatever support is needed.
Yes.
So I'm looking at the budget. In that last screen, it talked about startup of the West Michigan Access Collaborative. And so I'm wondering if, when I think about collaborative, I'm thinking of like multiple organizations. Mm-hmm. So with this $20,000, are there others that are putting in on this? Yep. And then just as identification, it really, the overall $100,000, it appears just to be an overall consulting contract, even though it's broken out into some different things, because there's a lot that looks similar. 3 might look similar to 1, or 2 look similar to 4, but it looks like it's an overall consulting piece with just a little bit of startup. And so I want to speak to that.
So for your question on the Access Collaborative, yes, that's absolutely the vision of the collaborative, is that as we as I mentioned, a little bit before, that our next phase is to go forward and meet individually with each of the cities to give them a forum to say some things that maybe they didn't want to say as part of a broader group, right? To say, we can all agree on this concept, we can all agree on how great it is, but here as a city, we'd like to address XYZ priorities, or we think we can only commit to, a certain level of time or support. But to your question, that's absolutely the goal of these meetings, is to sit down with every city to say that we do expect contributions from each of the participating cities, and what that looks like from an individual city perspective is yet to be determined. So our goal is to, use this initial funding to demonstrate the value in year one. And then once we've demonstrated that value, we can come back to the cities who have benefited, or who will benefit throughout this year and say, look at everything that we've accomplished. Now we need your help in terms of making this more of a permanent feature. So hopefully did I answer all of your question there?
Anything else? I would entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
All right. Any other comments or questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Thank you for
Thank
taking
you.
the time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. All right, Mr. Miller, you're still up. Hill and River Network Planning Update.
Yes, so this is no motion, just information for you all. So we've been working on this project now since about last October, so not quite a year yet. We are in what is referred to as conceptual design. So we're finishing that, that's done. We're now about ready to embark on design development, which is a much different financial commitment, and it's a commitment that we have to make with our eyes open in terms of, are these things tenable, and how do we begin to think about them in terms of building them and maintaining them? And those are very important questions that we have yet to answer. So we're sort of in a little bit of a holding pattern, and I'll revisit that as I close this out. But just as a reminder, the project is essentially three parts. It's what we referred to as street improvements, the Hillside Park, which is envisioned in GR Forward as Switchback Park, and that existing rail tunnel that cuts underneath the highway, the old GR Press tunnel, that is sitting really sort of underutilized at this point in time. So the street improvements portion of this project is really centered on one thing, but it's a really big thing. So when we started the project, we didn't really have this in our scope or in even our view, but very early on, the city engineering department brought to us a concept of what do we do with the Division Avenue and the Ionia Avenue right-of-ways. They're sort of redundant when they're put together. So how do we begin to think about that in a different way? And I think city engineering actually brought us a drawing and showed us a concept that they were thinking about, which is essentially taking this existing configuration. So you can see sort of Division Avenue up on this hill, and then about 7 feet down from that is Ionia Avenue. And they looked at it and said, why don't we move Division Avenue into Ionia Avenue and make the Division Avenue right-of-way part of a park? And so that would begin to look something like this. So you can see where that old Division Avenue right-of-way is now sort of part of a terraced park that brings us down to that Ionia. We certainly have some things to think about with that in terms of how we implement it, how we deal with bike infrastructure in it, but this particular plan shows us that there's a cycle track adjacent to the new Division Avenue. We refer to it as still Division Avenue and not Ionia. So that's one component of this project, and it's a substantial component. We have, in the concept design phase, some cost estimates, and I think that it's always important to understand when we're looking at a cost estimate at this level, it's sort of a broad shot in the dark almost. These have about 30% contingencies attached to them, so it's a very broad and big contingency, but the realignment of this is estimated to be about $11.5 million. So that's a substantial undertaking that we need to have discussions and figure out what that looks like. So that's one aspect of the project. And then this is sort of the design drawing that we're working from. It's a little too technical to really get into, but it begins to show that it is tenable to do this, it's feasible to do this, and sort of some of the implications as we have to tie it back into the existing Division Avenue right away from the north and the south. The Hillside Park is the other component that's really sort of integrated now into this Division Avenue piece. When we started the project, we thought of the street stuff as separate from the Hillside Park stuff, but by doing what we're doing, which is essentially integrating that Division Avenue right away into the park, we can no longer sort of separate them. They have to live together, so you can't do one without the other at this point in our design. So when we think about the Hillside Park, it's still an incremental project, but it is dependent upon what happens with the Division Avenue piece. So that becomes a very important conversation piece as we move forward in order to begin to think about implementing the Hillside Park. So we've worked in these last few months with a variety of stakeholders, including the neighbors up in Belknap Hill, and really sort of analyzed both the topography of the hill, the tree canopy of the hill, the existing conditions of the hill, soil conditions, and looked at how to best bring this 100-foot drop down from the top to the bottom. And looking at both stairs, ramps, what we would think of as a non-motorized path. We even looked at a variety of mechanical means like funiculars and elevators, which proved to be a little bit too expensive initially, but the big scary thing was the actual cost of maintenance and operations over the course of a long period of time. So those are sort of outside now. We've taken them out of the design and really looked at more of a, I guess what we would think of as a low-tech model of building this thing. But you can begin to see how this stuff works. There's a Hastings ramp that connects down from the existing Hastings infrastructure. There's a Newberry ramp that connects at the park. That all integrates into stairways in 2 locations where they exist today, and then a minor stair further down that integrates all of this stuff together. So there's multiple experiences and multiple paths along this trail for users to choose different routes and have different experiences as they go up and down the hill. The other thing about this that's important is you can see how it integrates into that Division Avenue right-of-way, which is essentially right here. So some of this stuff has to spill into that to make up for some of the differences that we're dealing with the height of the hill. And then it gives us the opportunity along that Division Avenue right-of-way to put in specific things, programming things, like say a dog park, a skate park, a water park, something, you know, wherever those yellow ellipses are, there could be things that happen from a programmatic standpoint to make that, to add to that park system. This is a view of it from looking south, so you can begin to see how this thing sits on the hill. This is about as far as we are. This isn't engineered. We don't really know what the mechanics of it is, but we do know that it works. It works with the contours and the grading, and it integrates pretty well into the hill. We just have to be strategic about how that happens so that we don't disturb, or we limit the disturbances of the hill as much as possible. Another view of the infrastructure, the proposed infrastructure, and then just some shots of what you might experience as you're along that pathway looking down into Monroe North. And then I'll bring this up. As I said, that hillside can be done in increments, and I think that that's probably the only way to feasibly do it because of the cost that would be associated with it. They're looking at the stuff that you just saw here, probably in the range of 25 to 30 million to do that work. So it's substantial, and it's something that we again have to figure out. And then finally, the rail tunnel. These are the existing conditions of that. It's actually in really good condition, and it's really big, much bigger than we had thought before we went into it. So it has a lot of opportunities. The concept plan really begins to look at it as both a place and as a way to get people from north and south. So non-motorized connection. There's plazas envisioned at both the north and the south piece. And it's really integrating into the existing structure as much as possible. These are some renderings that have been done as part of this exploration. So this would be the entry into the tunnel from the north side, from Monroe North. And then this is sort of what's going on inside of the tunnel. So the tunnel could become a place. So we built apparatus into it that we can hang things on. We can do art in it. We could do events in it. And those things all sound great, but we still have to figure out some really basic things, including who would do those kind of things, and who would own those kind of things, and who would maintain that kind of stuff. So I think that those are sort of questions that we're wrestling with right now. So in just to give you a heads up on where we are today, we have been working with many of our partners during this project, but in particular today, we are collaborating with the city of Grand Rapids, and that's multiple departments. That's planning, that's engineering, that's mobile GR, and parks in particular. And so we're working with them. We're working with the Michigan Department of Transportation because the tunnel goes under their infrastructure, because they still own pieces and parts of that hill. So we have to work with them as well. And then Michigan State University in particular, because this tunnel sort of connects their existing stuff to their owned lots on the north side of the highway. So they're essential to this. And I think some of the questions that we need to sort of begin to resolve with these partners is who owns what, you know, and both now, because we still don't know quite some of the ownership, and into the future. And is the hillside a city park? It's not a city park today. Will it become a city park? Will it become something else? So we have to figure out those kind of basic questions. Who maintains these things? So these are significant investments. They will require maintenance over time. And so we have to have some kind of discussion about what that is. That's predicated on probably the ownership to some extent. And then how they might be programmed and who programs them. Again, probably downstream from some of the ownership questions. And I think that a big one, maybe if we look at it as a critical path, you know, how and when might we reconfigure Ionia and Division? How does that happen? So those are all like really sort of difficult, some high-level questions about where we move forward with some of this stuff, and I think that's where we are today. So I'm happy to take any questions that you might have about this. Yes?
As we develop more as a city north, like Monroe North and some of those streets, do we expect also more traffic on the east and west streets? In my head, I'm just thinking about, you know, speed of cars, stoplights, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a question. I think that there's a lot of discussion about that, in particular today, just because of the amount of change that is happening in Monroe North, and some of its limitations in terms of its connectability. I think that some of the stuff and I glossed over it in the streets portion of it, but we have discussed like what some of those intersections might look like. You know, is the Division Avenue and those intersections that we're creating on it, are there roundabouts, are there traffic circles, are there signals, what kind of crosswalks might be there? And then within the network that's in Monroe North, what are some of those intersections? A lot of discussion is centered around the intersection at the bridge at Newberry and 6th Street and that crossing between those two parks. So that's a question. What is that intersection like? So I think that we're having those discussions. Those are more detailed to some of the broader ones that I mentioned.
I don't know if it's popular, if you will, still for the I know what you're calling it, but for the crosswalks that go above the street.
Yeah, we've had a lot of conversations about elevated crosswalks across Division Avenue, and I think that where we've landed as of today is that if we can make Division Avenue, the new Division Avenue, like Monroe is by those parks, it doesn't need a bridge. It'll be a very easy, nice crossing, predictable crossing. And so I think that but the neighbors have at various times said, why don't we just build a bridge? Because they don't envision, they look at it as it is today, and it's sort of like just a Thunderdome to get across there. And so like, how do we begin to think about making it a better place to start with?
And the last thing I'll say to that is, I assume too, impacting some of that or traffic even would be any future development of the Creston neighborhood. So I like imagine it, you know, I love that area too. So it's like, if it really gets bustling, then you got a whole lot more between, you know, that area and downtown as a major corridor.
Yeah. Yes.
Is Division or Ionia currently a state trunk line?
No.
No, they're not. Okay. So we wouldn't be able to get any funds potentially from the state?
I think whether we could still, I think that MDOT has even expressed the possibility of getting funds for not just the the streetway itself, but some of the connectivity that goes off from that and towards the river. So there's a lot of money flowing into that system right now in terms of like the reconnecting community stuff.
Yeah, you're reading my
and
mind.
So I think that when we met with them initially, which was back in January of this year, some of their early comments were just talking about those kind of opportunities. So I think they're a good partner to have in the discussion, not only because they have a lot of ownership in it, but like also because they can help us figure out ways to potentially finance some of this stuff.
Okay, good.
Because it's a big lift.
Yeah, it is. My other two questions, for the rail connectivity, are we also thinking bigger and broader about where, once we get up on the hill, potentially the connection point is to the possible rails to trails work that we want to do to go further out?
Yes, a
towards
little
Lowell?
bit, yes. So I think that if we think about, like, in particular, the Hastings connection, which would integrate into the network on the hill, you can come around and really go into the neighborhood where what is the Highland Park?
Yeah, Highland Park.
So, and that Lowell Trail potentially cuts right through the lower part of Highland Park and goes out east. So I think that there is a lot of potential in terms of the connections that we've already made and the connections that we envision both for this and for the what we commonly refer to as the Greenway.
Okay. And then one last question slash
you have
comment.
3 questions.
I did have 3. I just didn't put them all
Three-part.
together. I'm assuming that if we are able to move forward with this, the division Ionia coming together, our intent to go to two-way on Ionia and Ottawa would easily flow with that?
I would assume so. I don't think that we've discussed it in terms of like its integration with this project at this point in time.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Do you have an ideal envisioned timeframe for this?
Good question. I think if you would have asked me that at the beginning of the year, we would have been very optimistic and said one of these things, our goal for one of these things would be to try to start it, you know, the potentially even by next April, right? We're not there at this point. I mean, we're at the end of concept design. We now have to go into design development. That's probably about a 6 to 7 month process to really refine this thing. And before we can go into that, we really have to have a lot of these other questions nailed down so we have some predictability about that expenditure and moving forward with that design. So I mean, optimistically, you could be thinking maybe the following April, 2024 for one of these. I think if I look at it from a simplicity standpoint, the one that's easiest is the tunnel, both financially and I think from an ownership standpoint, although we're still sort of navigating through some of that stuff. But that still has some stuff going on in it, like, you know, who maintains it, who operates it, who ultimately is owning that thing. So I think that's ideally potentially what could happen. And then I think once Division Avenue happens, there's a whole probably cascading effect that we start building incremental things. We build a stair, and then the next year we build part of a ramp that connects that stair to something else. And so you start to build this infrastructure in sort of, I guess, I don't want to say piecemeal, but probably incrementally is a better term. So you can do it in a more financially beneficial way.
Can I ask a follow-up? Are we concerned, though, that if we don't have a tightened timeline, that we're going to lose the opportunity to use potential ARPA funds? Yeah. I mean, to me,
Yes.
I get that this is a huge project,
Yes.
but we're going to miss out on some significant funds if we don't
Yeah.
move it along more quickly.
Yep, I agree.
Okay.
So that's the thing that looms in the sort of background of
Okay.
all of this.
All right, thanks.
So time is of the essence in some ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Any other comments or questions for Mark?
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Executive Director report, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A few updates for everyone. One, wanted to highlight that we did celebrate a new dog park opening last week. So over there at the corner of Bloomrich and Summer, had a great event and turnout. And if you haven't been over, I encourage you to go check it out. In particular for the mural that really pops and stands out. So kudos to the activation team. Kim, Giovanni, Megan, and others did a great job in pulling that all together. The Heartside murals that you all approved funding for back in May, those are moving forward this month. So we have 4 great artists on board and have our locations selected in the Heartside neighborhood. So you'll see those start to take place in the next few weeks. So keep an eye out for that. Skywalk wayfinding, we expect the vinyl will be installed in the Skywalk for the new wayfinding system by the end of the month. So that is moving along. There'll be some other components to come after that. Then Phase B, which will be sort of the first infrastructure pieces to go out downtown, those should be out to bid in September. And then we'll start to see those installed as well. So moving along well there. Wanted to point out the construction on Monroe. If you haven't been down there recently, Monroe's under construction, very much so, but the mast arm that's going to help with the crosswalk is going in today. So that's the one they're pulling out from out Michigan Street, just a little east of Fuller there. That'll go in today, and then the street should be opened back up probably end of the week. So you'll see some significant changes start to happen there in the next couple of days. Last thing on the project side, the Studio Park Tower, if you haven't seen, there's a crane up on it right now, and there's a event that they're calling a sky breaking happening in 2 weeks. So that project is getting going, and as a reminder, that'll add 165 new units to downtown. So excited to see that. And then one event to highlight for you, a lot happening in the event space, obviously, not to mention the Water Fest that happened a few weeks ago. That was great. Hispanic Fest and Glimpse of Africa were over the weekend. But wanted to point out our DJRI produced event, Return to the River, that's happening on August 27th. It's our kind of first highlight of everything that's going on river related. So there'll be live music, entertainment, performers along the Riverwalk, and really, again, just a way to highlight some of the riverfront spaces and the work happening there. So hope you can come down and join. That's Saturday, August 27th. And those are my highlights.
Any questions? Tim? Good highlights.
Great.
Okay, next is public comment. If there's anyone in the public that would like to step forward, now is your opportunity. All right, seeing none, how about board member comments, discussion, added value?
Just first off, where did y'all find the chalkboard? But
Great question. Vintage shop.
I think I'm having memories of me trying to get out of class to go clean the erasers.
Well, yeah.
It was in the bid.
Anything else? I am happy to report that hotel occupancies seem to be rebounding.
Mm-hmm.
So that's good news for all of us and the county. And so that's good news.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we have a lot going on downtown. I mean, we have the ESTO conference here with almost 1,000 people
Yeah.
staying downtown. So if you're not familiar with that group, they're destination planners from throughout the entire country here, and I was able to spend some time with them. And then we have the Advanced Manufacturing Expo.
Correct.
And they're expecting, I think, I was talking to them yesterday, I think they're expecting 4,000 to 6,000
Yeah.
people to go through the expo. Jenna, you're probably connected with them, you're not? It should be great. I mean, I'll probably walk through sometime this week. But
Yeah, it's good stuff.
yeah.
Anything else? All right, thank you, everyone. We're adjourned.
All right. Got to see the jetpack over there.
Oh, you did?